"Please don't hurt me again," she whispered. But the Mafia boss wrapped his coat around her. The neon sign above the entrance of the diner buzzed with a dying, electric hum, flickering against the relentless downpour that slicked the streets of Harborview. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee, grease, and lemon floor cleaner. It was 2 a.m, and the city was asleep, save for the desperate Ene and the dangerous. Lena Ward wiped the counter with a circular, rhythmic motion, her eyes fixed on the laminate surface, but her ears tuned to the street outside. She was 28 years old, though the shadows beneath her eyes made her look older. Her uniform was a size too big, swallowing her slender frame, a deliberate choice to hide the shape of her body. She did not want to be noticed. She wanted to be a ghost. Every time the bell above the door chimed, Lena's shoulders tensed. It was a reflex she had tried to unlearn for 3 years, but the body remembered what the mind tried to bury. She checked the front lock of the diner 3 times before her shift started. At home, in her cramped apartment on the edge of the industrial district, she had 3 deadbolts. She moved to the register to count the cash, $40 in tips. It was not enough to make a dent in the envelope she kept hidden under her mattress, but it was something. She needed to pay the neighborhood loan shark by Friday, or the threats would turn into something physical. She rubbed her left wrist, wincing slightly. The bruise there was fading, a yellowing smudge where a collector had grabbed her too hard last week to remind her of the interest rates. Lena adjusted her sleeves, pulling the fabric down to her knuckles. She traced the thin, white line of a scar that ran along the inside of her forearm. It was an old injury, a souvenir from a life she had abandoned. A life involving high-stakes games, expensive champagne, and men who smiled while they ordered executions, a life involving him. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing the image of Adrian Morello out of her mind. She was Lena Ward now. Lena Vanko was dead. She had to be. The bell above the door did not just chime. It seemed to announce a shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. Lena froze. She did not turn around immediately. She listened. The heavy, confident footsteps of men who owned the ground they walked on echoed against the linoleum. There were 4 of them, maybe 5. The low murmur of conversation stopped instantly as they entered. She took a breath, steeling herself, and turned around with the pot of coffee in her hand. They were seated in the back booth, the one with the best view of the entrance and the kitchen. 4 men in dark, tailored suits that cost more than Lena made in a year. They looked out of place in the grimy diner, like wolves resting in a rabbit hutch. Then she saw him. He sat in the center, sliding into the booth with a grace that was both elegant and predatory. Adrian Morello. The pot of coffee shook in Lena's hand. Hot liquid sloshed over the rim and burned her thumb, but she did not make a sound. He looked exactly the same as he had 3 years ago. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that was devastatingly handsome and utterly cold. His jaw was sharp. Covered in the shadow of a day-old beard, he wore a charcoal overcoat, unbuttoned to reveal a black dress shirt and a silver tie. He looked tired, but it was the exhaustion of a general who had been at war, not a man who worked for a living. Lena turned back to the counter, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could not serve him. She had to leave. She had to run out the back door and never stop running. But she needed this job. And if she ran, she would draw attention. "You are Lena Ward," she told herself. "You are just a waitress. He does not know you. You look different now. Your hair is shorter. You are thinner. You are nobody." She forced her feet to move. She grabbed 4 menus and walked toward the booth, keeping her gaze lowered. She placed the menus on the table, her hands trembling. "Coffee. Gentlemen," she asked, her voice raspy. 3 of the men nodded, barely looking at her. They were scanning the windows, the kitchen door, the street outside, security. Then Adrian spoke. "Black. No sugar." The sound of his voice sent a shockwave through her spine. It was deep, smooth, and terrified her more than the thunder rattling the windows. It was the voice that had once whispered promises in her ear. It was the voice that had ordered her to stand on a street corner in the rain, waiting for a car that never came, acting as bait for a rival cartel while he watched from the shadows. She poured the coffee. She focused on the swirling black liquid. "Do not look at him." She moved to fill his cup. As she tipped the pot, she felt eyes on her face. Not a casual glance, a study. She made the mistake of looking up. Adrian was staring right at her. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and piercing. They narrowed slightly as they swept over her face, tracing the curve of her cheekbone, the shape of her mouth. Recognition flickered in his gaze. It was not a question, it was a statement. Lena pulled the pot away too quickly. A few drops splattered onto the pristine white tablecloth. "I am sorry," she stammered. "I will get a rag." She turned and walked away, her legs feeling like lead. She could feel his gaze burning into her back, a physical weight dragging her down. He knew. She hid in the kitchen for 20 minutes, pretending to organize the silverware. Her hands shook so badly she dropped a fork, the metallic clang sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. "He is going to kill me," she thought. "He is going to finish what the rival family failed to do when he left me there." But when she finally peeked through the service window, the booth was empty. Relief washed over her, so profound it nearly made her knees buckle. They were gone. He had not recognized her. It was just her paranoia. She walked out to clear the table. A $100 bill sat under his coffee cup. She stared at it, feeling sick. She snatched it up, crumpling it in her fist, intending to throw it in the trash. She did not want his money. It was blood money. The diner was empty now. The cook had gone out for a smoke. Lena moved to the front door to flip the sign to closed. She reached for the lock. "We need to talk." The voice came from the shadows of the booth near the window. Lena gasped, spinning around. Adrian was still there. He had not left with his men. He was sitting alone in the dark corner, watching her. She pressed her back against the glass door, her hand gripping the handle behind her. "I am closed," she said, her voice shaking. "You have to leave." Adrian stood up. He moved slowly, deliberately, his hands in his pockets. He walked toward her until he was standing on the other side of the counter. "Lena Vanko," he said softly. "My name is Lena Ward," she snapped, fear giving way to a sudden, hot spark of anger. He tilted his head, studying her. "Why did you run?" "Lena," she laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You have no right to ask me that. You have no right to be here. I looked for you," he said, "but for 6 months. I turned the city upside down. Everyone said you were dead. Maybe I am." She said, "The girl you knew is dead. You killed her." Adrian's expression did not change, but a muscle in his jaw ticked. He looked at her uniform, at the tired slump of her shoulders, at the cheap name tag pinned to her chest. "You are working in a diner," he said, his voice laced with confusion. "You barely have enough money to buy decent shoes. Why are you living like this?" "I am living honestly," she hissed, "which is more than I can say for you." He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm. "Lena, don't touch me." She jerked her hand back. As she did, her sleeve rode up, revealing the purple and yellow bruise on her wrist. Adrian's eyes locked onto the mark. His calm demeanor fractured. He reached out faster this time, catching her hand before she could pull away. His grip was firm but gentle, his thumb brushing over the discolored skin. "Who did this?" he demanded. His voice dropped an octave, turning into a low growl. "Let go of me," Lena cried, struggling to pull her hand free. "Who put their hands on you?" Adrian repeated, his eyes blazing with a sudden, terrifying intensity. "Was it a boyfriend? A customer?" "It is none of your business," she yelled, ripping her hand from his grasp. She pulled her sleeve down frantically. "It is just a debt. I can handle it. I handle everything myself now. I do not need you. I do not want you. Get out." Adrian stared at her, his chest rising and falling with a slow, controlled rhythm. He looked at the bruise again, then at her face. He seemed to be fighting a war inside his own head. Finally, he stepped back. The mask of indifference slid back into place. "I will go," he said. He turned and walked toward the door. He paused with his hand on the brass handle. "If you need money, Lena, I would rather starve." She cut him off. He nodded once, grimly, and walked out into the rain. Lena locked the door behind him, her fingers fumbling with the deadbolt. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She waited another hour before she felt safe enough to leave. She changed out of her uniform and into a thick sweater and jeans. She wrapped a scarf around her neck and pulled her hood up. She exited through the back alley, avoiding the main street where his car might be waiting. The rain had turned into a drizzle, a cold mist that clung to her eyelashes. Harborview was a maze of narrow streets and towering brick buildings. Lena walked quickly, her head down, clutching her purse tight against her side. She listened for footsteps. She listened for engines. She turned down 4th Street, a shortcut to her apartment. It was a narrow, dim alleyway lined with overflowing dumpsters and fire escapes. She was halfway down the block when 2 shadows detached themselves from the wall. Lena stopped. She turned to go back, but another man stepped out from behind a parked van, blocking her retreat. Well, the first man said. He was big, with a shaved head and a neck tattoo of a scorpion. Lena recognized him. He was one of the collectors for the loan shark. Benny the Tooth. Benny is getting impatient. Lena, the man said, slapping a heavy length of pipe into his palm. You were supposed to pay up on Tuesday. I have the money, Lena said, her voice trembling. She reached into her bag. I made tips tonight. I can give you $50. $50. The man laughed. It was a cruel, wet sound. The interest went up. Sweetheart, you owe $500. I do not have $500, Lena whispered. The man stepped closer. He grabbed the front of her sweater and shoved her hard. Lena flew backward, her shoulder slamming into the rough brick wall. The wind was knocked out of her. Please, she gasped. I will get it. Just give me 2 days. You had 2 days, the man snarled. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. He smelled of tobacco and rot. Benny said, if you do not pay, we take it out of your hide. Consider this a warning. He raised his hand. Lena flinched, curling into a ball, waiting for the blow. Suddenly, a blinding white light flooded the alley. The roar of an engine filled the narrow space, echoing off the brick walls like a beast waking up. A sleek, black sedan rolled slowly into the mouth of the alley, blocking the exit. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the rain like falling diamonds. The thugs froze, shielding their eyes. Who is that? The second man shouted. The car doors opened. 3 men stepped out. They did not look like street thugs. They moved with military precision. The lead thug dropped Lena and took a step back. Hey, this is private business, he yelled. Adrian's men did not speak. They advanced. It was a blur of motion, a sickening crack of bone, a shout of pain, and then the sound of running footsteps. The thugs scrambled over the chain-link fence at the end of the alley, abandoning their intimidation tactics in the face of superior predators. Silence returned to the alley, heavier than before. Lena remained pressed against the wall, sliding down until she was crouching in the mud. She was gasping for air, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. She looked up. Adrian stood before her. He was silhouetted against the headlights, a tall, dark figure of absolute authority. He was not looking at where the thugs had run. He was looking only at her. He stepped closer. Lena flinched. She squeezed her eyes shut and turned her face away, wrapping her arms around her head. The memory of the last 3 years, the abandonment, the fear, the violence, crashed into the present moment. She did not see a savior. She saw the man who had taught her that the world was cruel. Please do not hurt me again, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the hum of the car engine. It was broken, small, and filled with a terrifying mixture of fear and resentment. Adrian stopped. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. Lena waited for him to yell. She waited for him to tell her she was pathetic. She waited for him to demand answers about why she owed money to low-level sharks. Instead, she felt a sudden warmth. Heavy, soft wool settled over her shoulders. It smelled of cedar, rain, and him. Lena opened her eyes. Adrian had taken off his coat. He was standing in the rain in just his dress shirt, the wet fabric clinging to his chest. He was wrapping the coat around her. his movements incredibly gentle. He pulled the lapels together under her chin, his knuckles grazing her jaw. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were dark pools of emotion that she could not decipher. There was no anger there, no arrogance. He did not say a word. He did not tell her it was okay. He did not promise that the bad men were gone. He simply adjusted the coat so it covered her shaking hands. "Come," he said finally. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual command. He offered her his hand. Lena looked at his open palm. She looked at the expensive car waiting with its engine running. She knew that if she got in that car, she was crossing a line she could never uncross. She was stepping back into the shadow of the Morello family, but she was cold. She was terrified. And for the first time in 3 years, someone had stood between her and the violence of the world. She did not take his hand. She could not bring herself to touch him yet. But she nodded. Adrian did not push. He simply turned and walked beside her, shielding her from the wind with his own body as he guided her toward the car, as she sank into the leather seat, surrounded by the scent of him. Lena felt a confusing, nauseating mix of safety and dread. The coat was warm, but it felt like a cage. The door clicked shut, locking her in. The car began to move, gliding through the rain-slicked streets of Harborview, carrying her back toward the past she had tried so hard to outrun. The morning sun that filtered through the thin, yellowed blinds of Lena's apartment did not bring warmth. It only illuminated the dust motes, dancing in the stagnant air and the heavy charcoal overcoat draped over the back of her only chair. Lena sat on the edge of her mattress, staring at the coat. It was an intruder in her small, carefully controlled world. The fabric was cashmere, soft enough to ruin a person for anything rougher, and it still carried the faint, intoxicating scent of cedar and rain. It smelled like Adrian Morello. She had spent the night staring at her door, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for his men to come and collect the favor she now owed. But the hallway had remained silent. She stood up and walked to the chair, reaching out to touch the lapel before snatching her hand back as if burned. She should throw it away. She should march down to the dumpster behind the building and shove it into the trash where it belonged. But she did not. Instead, she picked it up, her fingers sinking into the material, and folded it with precise, trembling care. She placed it on the top shelf of her closet, tucked behind a stack of old towels. "I am not keeping it," she whispered to the empty room. "I just do not want him to think I care enough to destroy it." It was a lie, and she knew it. Keeping the coat was a weakness, a tiny, fractured piece of her armor that she refused to acknowledge. She dressed for work in a daze, pulling on her uniform and tying her apron tight, as if the strings could hold her unraveling life together. The diner was chaotic. The lunch rush had hit Harborview like a tidal wave, a clamor of shouting orders, clattering plates, and the hiss of the grill. Lena moved through the noise on autopilot, pouring coffee and stacking dirty dishes, her eyes constantly darting toward the front door. Around 1 in the afternoon, the bell chimed. Lena looked up, expecting a customer, but froze when she saw the man standing in the entryway. It was not Adrian. It was Marco. She remembered him from years ago. He was Adrian's shadow, a man built like a vending machine with eyes that missed nothing. He wore a suit that fit too well and stood with his hands clasped respectfully in front of him. He spotted her instantly. He did not sit down. He walked straight to the counter where she was tallying a bill. "Miss Ward," Marco said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the diner's noise. "Get out," Lena said, her voice tight. "I told your boss I want nothing to do with him." Marco ignored her command. He reached into his inner pocket and placed a thick, cream-colored envelope on the counter. He slid it toward her with 2 fingers. "Mister, Morello wanted you to have this. He said to tell you the matter is settled." Before Lena could respond, Marco turned on his heel and walked out, disappearing into the street traffic. Lena stared at the envelope. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She picked it up. It was heavy. With shaking fingers, she tore the flap open. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper. It was a receipt from Benny the Tooth, the loan shark who had sent the men to break her legs the night before. Stamped across the front in red ink were the words, "Paid in full." There was no note from Adrian. Just the cold, hard fact that he had reached into her life and wiped away her biggest problem with the careless ease of a god swatting a fly. Fury, hot and blinding, surged through her. He thinks he can buy me, she thought. He thinks a check clears the slate. She slammed the envelope onto the counter, startling a customer eating soup nearby. "Cover for me," she shouted to the cook. She ran out the back door, her apron still tied around her waist. She sprinted down the alley and out onto the main street, scanning the traffic for Marco's car. But he was gone. The street was filled with anonymous sedans and delivery trucks. She stood on the sidewalk, chest heaving, clutching the receipt in her fist until the paper crinkled. He had paid her debt. Yes, but in doing so, he had robbed her of her independence. He had made her beholden to him again. And that was exactly what she had spent 3 years running from. By the time her shift ended, night had fallen over Harborview, bringing with it a biting wind off the water. Lena exited the diner through the front door this time, her jaw set, her anger having cooled into a hard, determined knot in her stomach. She stepped onto the sidewalk and stopped. He was there. Adrian Morello was leaning against the side of his black sedan, parked directly in front of the diner. He was smoking a cigarette, the ember glowing bright orange in the gloom. When he saw her, he dropped the cigarette and crushed it beneath the heel of his polished shoe. "You are persistent," Lena said, walking toward him. She did not stop until she was 2 feet away, close enough to see the lines of fatigue etched around his eyes. "I am careful," Adrian corrected. His voice was rougher than she remembered, worn down by the friction of his world. Lena held up the crumpled receipt. "I did not ask for this. I know," Adrian said calmly, "but you needed it. I needed to handle it myself," Lena snapped. "That is what normal people do. Adrian, we pay our own debts. We do not have mafia bosses sweep in and throw money at our problems so they can own us. I do not want to own you." "Lena, do not lie to me," she interrupted, her voice rising. It echoed off the brick storefronts. "That is all you know how to do. You move people around like chess pieces. Remember 3 years ago? Remember the warehouse on 5th Street? Adrian stiffened. His expression shuddered. "Becoming a mask of stone. I remember," he said quietly. "You told me it was safe," Lena said, the memory clawing at her throat. "You told me I just had to stand there and wait for a contact. You used me as bait to draw out the Irish syndicate so you could get their shipping routes. And when the shooting started, you were not there. You were 3 blocks away, securing your assets." "Lena," he started, taking a step toward her. "I bled in that warehouse." "Adrian," she hissed, stepping back. "I hid under a rotting tarp for 6 hours waiting for the police because you decided I was an acceptable loss. I never thought they would fire on you," Adrian said. The admission came out fast, desperate, cracking the smooth veneer of his control. "I miscalculated. It was a selfish decision. And I have lived with the regret of it every single day since you vanished." "You do not get to have regrets," she said, tears stinging her eyes. "You get power, I get scars." Adrian looked at her, and for the first time, Lena saw something raw in his gaze. He looked like a man standing in the ruins of a house he had burned down himself. "The men in the alley last night," Adrian said, while shifting the subject, his voice low and urgent. "They were not just loan shark muscle. Lena frowned, wiping her eyes furiously. "What are you talking about? I looked into them," Adrian continued. "They work for Benny." "Yes, but Benny answers to the Rook cartel now. They were asking questions about you, not just about the money. They were asking about where you came from. So," Lena whispered, a chill running down her spine. "So they know who you are," Adrian said grimly. "Or at least, they suspect you have a connection to me. The Rook family is trying to dismantle my operation. They are looking for leverage. If they find out you are the woman from the warehouse years ago, the woman I was looking for, they will not just break your legs. They will take you to get to me." Lena stared at him. The street suddenly felt very wide and very exposed. You led them to me," she accused, though her voice lacked its earlier fire. "I am trying to keep them away from you," Adrian said. "That is why I paid the debt, to cut the tie, to make you boring to them." Before Lena could answer, a screech of tires tore through the night air. Adrian's head snapped toward the sound. A silver sedan was careening down the street, its headlights off, moving fast, down. Adrian roared. He did not wait for her to react. He lunged forward, slamming into her with the force of a linebacker. His arms wrapped around her waist, and he threw them both to the pavement behind the engine block of his parked car. Pop, 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 pop. The air exploded with the sharp, cracking sound of gunfire. Glass shattered above them as the windows of the diner were blown out. Bullets sparked against the pavement, whining like angry hornets. Lena screamed, but the sound was smothered against Adrian's chest. He was on top of her, his heavy body covering hers completely, shielding her from the chaos. He pressed one large hand over the back of her head, forcing her face into the gritty asphalt. "Stay down," he growled into her ear. The car roared past, the gunfire ceasing as quickly as it had begun. The vehicle sped away into the night, leaving only the sound of falling glass and car alarms wailing in the distance. Adrian did not move immediately. He stayed covering her, his breathing ragged and harsh against her neck. Lena could feel the rapid, thundering beat of his heart against her own chest. She was shaking, her hands clutching the lapels of his suit jacket. "Are you hit?" he demanded, pushing himself up slightly to scan her body. His hands moved over her arms, her back, checking for blood. "No," she gasped. "I think... no." He grabbed her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were wild, the pupils blown wide with adrenaline and fear. "We have to go," he said. "Now. It is not safe here." He hauled her to her feet. Lena stumbled, her legs feeling like water. She looked at the diner, the shattered windows, the jagged holes in the walls where she had been standing moments ago. "My apartment," she stammered. "No," Adrian said, opening the back door of his car and practically shoving her inside. "They know where you live. You are coming with me." He slammed the door and jumped into the driver's seat. The car peeled away from the curb, leaving the ruined diner behind in the darkness. The drive was a blur of neon lights and rain. Adrian drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand constantly checking the rearview mirror. He took a labyrinthine route, doubling back through side streets and industrial parks until he was sure they were not being followed. They arrived at a townhouse in the wealthy district of Highgate. It was a tall, imposing building made of gray stone, indistinguishable from the other expensive homes on the block. Adrian punched a code into the keypad at the gate and drove into an underground garage. The heavy steel door rolled shut behind them, sealing them in silence. Upstairs. The townhouse was beautiful but cold. The furniture was modern and sparse, the surfaces gleaming with marble and glass. It looked like a showroom, not a home. Adrian locked the front door. Engaging 3 separate deadbolts, he turned to Lena. She was standing in the middle of the living room, hugging herself. She was shivering violently. "You are bleeding," Adrian said softly. Lena looked down. A shallow cut ran along her forearm, oozing bright red blood. She must have scraped it on the pavement when he tackled her. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to the leather sofa. He disappeared into a bathroom and returned a moment later with a first aid kit and a bowl of warm water. He sat on the coffee table in front of her, his knees brushing against hers. "Give me your arm." Lena hesitated. Every instinct she had honed over the last 3 years screamed at her to run, to not let him touch her. But the adrenaline was fading, leaving her exhausted and hollow. She extended her arm. Adrian took her wrist. His hands were large and rough, calloused from years of violence, yet his touch was impossibly gentle. He dipped a cloth into the water and began to clean the grit from the wound. Lena hissed as the water stung. "I am sorry," Adrian murmured. His eyes focused intently on her skin. "I am trying to be gentle." His face was inches from hers. She could smell the scent of gunpowder clinging to his shirt, mixing with his cologne. He looked devastated. The arrogance she hated was gone, replaced by a grim, heavy guilt. "Why did you shield me?" Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You could have been shot." "I would rather be shot than watch you bleed again," he said simply. He applied an antiseptic, his breath warm against her skin as he blew softly on the cut to cool the sting. The sensation sent a jolt of electricity through Lena's body. It was a familiar pull, a magnetic attraction that defied logic and safety. She looked at his dark eyelashes, the curve of his mouth, and felt a dangerous softening in her chest. She jerked her arm back. "Don't," she said. Adrian froze. He looked up, his eyes searching hers. "Don't what?" he asked hoarsely. "Don't act like you care," Lena said, her voice trembling. "Don't make me feel safe. The last time I trusted you, I ended up alone in the dark. I cannot do this again, Adrian. I cannot let you in." Adrian slowly lowered his hands. He capped the antiseptic bottle and set it aside. He did not argue. He did not try to convince her. He just looked at her with a profound sadness. "I know," he said. He stood up and walked to the liquor cabinet. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He brought one to her and sat down on the armchair opposite the sofa, loosening his tie. "Drink," he said. "It will help the shock." Lena took the glass. She wrapped her hands around it, seeking the warmth. She looked out the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights of Harborview twinkled below them, a beautiful, dangerous grid. Adrian was watching her. He took a long swallow of his drink. "When my father died," he began, his voice low and contemplative. "I was 22. I was studying architecture. I wanted to build things. Lena, I did not want to break them." Lena turned her head to look at him. He had never spoken about his father before, but the family needed a head. Adrian continued, "And I was the only son. I learned very quickly that if you show weakness, you die. If you care about people, you give your enemies a target, so I learned to shut it off. I learned to look at a map of the city and see territories, not neighborhoods. I learned to look at people and see pawns, knights, and bishops." He swirled the liquid in his glass, staring into the vortex. "When I met you 3 years ago, I told myself you were just another piece on the board. A civilian who could get me close to the Irish. I told myself I could use you and discard you and it would not matter because that is what a boss does." He looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. "I lied to myself. When I left you in that warehouse, when the deal went south, and I had to choose between saving the operation and coming back for you, I chose the operation because that is what my father would have done, and it hollowed me out. Lena, it turned me into something I hate." The room was silent. Save for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, Lena felt the wall she had built around her heart trembling. It was one thing to hate a monster. It was another to hate a man who knew he was broken. She stood up and walked over to him to return her empty glass. Adrian reached out to take it. As the glass passed between them, their fingers brushed. The contact was electric. They both froze. Adrian did not pull away. His hand lingered, his thumb unconsciously tracing the back of her knuckles. It was a ghost of a caress, a desperate plea for connection. Lena looked down at their hands. She remembered the warmth of his coat. She remembered the weight of his body shielding her from the bullets. She remembered the way he had looked at her in the diner, like she was the only thing in the world that was real. She wanted to lean into him. She wanted to let him protect her. But she remembered the warehouse. She remembered the cold rain and the fear. She pulled her hand away, stepping back. "Your world creates casualties." "Adrian," she whispered, her voice aching, "and my heart cannot survive being one of them again." Adrian's hand fell to his side. He nodded slowly, accepting her verdict, though it clearly pained him. "The guest room is down the hall," he said, his voice flat. "You will be safe here tonight. I will stay out here." Lena turned and walked down the hallway, clutching her arm where he had cleaned the wound. She closed the door to the guest room and locked it, though she knew the lock was flimsy against a man like him. She slid down the door to the floor, burying her face in her knees. She was safe from the cartel for tonight. But as she listened to the silence of the townhouse, she realized the greater danger was already inside the walls with her. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, a stark contrast to the chaos of shattered glass and gunfire that still rang in Lena's ears. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the skyline of Harborview. From up here, the city looked peaceful, a grid of amber and white lights. But Lena knew better. Down there, in the shadows, men were hunting her. Adrian stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, though he did not touch her. "You cannot go back to your apartment." "Lena," he said. His voice was low, devoid of the command he used with his men, but heavy with a finality that brooked no argument. "I have to live somewhere." "Adrian," she replied, turning to face him, "I have a job. I have bills. I cannot just vanish into your fortress and pretend the world does not exist." "You do not have a job," he corrected gently. "Not anymore." Marco went by the diner this morning. The owner is terrified. He thinks a gang war is starting on his doorstep. He fired you. "Lena, for your safety and his—" Lena felt the blood drain from her face. She wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive posture she seemed to live in lately. "So that is it," she said, her voice rising with panic. "I am homeless and unemployed, and the Rook cartel wants to use me as leverage." "You are not homeless," Adrian said, stepping closer. "You stay here." "Here," she repeated, looking around the expansive, sterile living room that cost more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. "There is a guest wing," Adrian said. "It is private. You will have your own space. And as for work, I need someone I can trust." Lena laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Trust, you and I do not have that." "Adrian, we have history," he countered. "And right now, that is worth more. I have a legitimate shipping logistics company. Morello Imports. It is the clean face of the family business. I need a bookkeeper, someone to audit the accounts. My previous accountant retired suddenly." "Retired?" Lena asked archly. "Retired to Florida," Adrian said, his face deadpan. "Actually retired. Lena, the books are clean, mostly, but I need someone sharp to maintain them. You were studying accounting before everything happened. You have the mind for it." Lena looked at him. He was offering her a lifeline, a way to survive without feeling like a charity case. He was giving her dignity in the form of a job, even if it was a job inside the beast's belly. She took a deep breath. "I have rules," she said, her voice steadying. "Name them," Adrian said. "Strictly professional," she said, holding his gaze. "I work for the company, not for you personally. I pay rent for the room out of my salary, and we do not talk about the past. We do not talk about us. There is no us." Adrian's jaw tightened, a flicker of pain crossing his dark eyes, but he nodded. "Agreed," he said, "strictly professional." The transition into the penthouse was surreal. Lena moved her meager belongings, 2 suitcases of clothes and a box of books, into the guest suite, which was larger than her entire previous apartment. For the first week, the boundaries held. Lena went to the office set up for her in the east wing of the penthouse, burying herself in spreadsheets and tax codes. She saw Adrian only in passing, usually in the mornings when the smell of espresso filled the kitchen. She began to see the duality of the man she had once loved. By day, he was the dawn. She would hear him in his study, the door ajar, his voice dropping to a lethal, hushed tone as he issued orders. She heard him discussing territories, enforcement, and leverage with a cold detachment that made her skin crawl. He was a general moving troops, calculating acceptable losses, but in the evenings, the mask slipped. One Tuesday, she found him in the kitchen, staring into the open refrigerator. He looked exhausted, his tie undone, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the tattoos on his forearms. "Do we have any milk?" he asked, looking at her with a boyish helplessness that disarmed her. "Top shelf, behind the sparkling water," she said, leaning against the door frame. He found it and poured a glass, leaning back against the counter. He did not talk about the shipment that had been seized or the rival enforcer who had been dealt with. "I saw you reading in the library earlier," he said softly. "The old copy of The Great Gatsby." "It is my favorite," Lena admitted, surprised he had noticed. "I never understood it," Adrian said, taking a sip of milk. "All that money, all those parties. just to get back the one thing he lost. It seemed futile. "It is not about the money," Lena said, stepping into the room. "It is about the green light, the hope that you can fix the past, that you can be worthy of the thing you love if you just build a big enough castle." Adrian looked at her, the glass halfway to his mouth. His eyes were dark and unreadable. "He built the castle," Adrian said quietly, "and she still did not choose him in the end. Because he built it on lies," Lena said, her voice barely a whisper. The air between them grew heavy, charged with the unspoken parallel. Adrian looked away first, breaking the tension. "Good night." "Lena," he said, rinsing his glass. "Good night, Adrian. By the second week." The professional distance began to fray, not because of romance, but because of the danger lurking in the numbers. Lena was good at her job. She had an eye for patterns, for disruptions in the flow of data. Morello Imports was supposed to be the legitimate front, shielding the family's wealth from federal scrutiny. But as she cross-referenced the shipping manifests with the fuel expenditures, she found a discrepancy. It was small at first, $2,000 here, $5,000 there, always categorized under miscellaneous maintenance or emergency docking fees. But when she pulled the records back 6 months, the pattern became a hemorrhage. Someone was siphoning money. And looking at the routing numbers, the funds were being washed through shell companies that, if Lena's memory of the underworld rumors was correct, belonged to associates of the Rook cartel. She sat back in her ergonomic chair, her heart pounding. It was an internal leak. Someone inside Adrian's inner circle was feeding the enemy. She printed the spreadsheets, highlighting the irregularities in red marker. She knew she should just email it. She knew she should stay the quiet bookkeeper. But this was dangerous. This could get Adrian killed. She marched to his office. The door was closed. She could hear voices inside, heated, angry voices. She knocked once and opened the door. Adrian was standing behind his massive mahogany desk. Sitting opposite him was Cassian, his second-in-command. Cassian was a man of sharp angles and cold efficiency, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. He had never liked Lena, not 3 years ago, and certainly not now. "We are busy," Cassian snapped, not even looking at her. "It is important," Lena said, walking into the room and placing the file on Adrian's desk. Adrian looked at her, surprised by her intrusion. "What is this?" "Discrepancies," Lena said, keeping her voice steady despite Cassian's glare. "In the shipping accounts, someone is skimming off the top. Adrian, and they are not just stealing. They are funneling it to accounts in the Cayman Islands that link back to the Rook holdings." Cassian stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You let her look at the master ledgers," he demanded, turning to Adrian. "She is a civilian, Adrian. She is a liability." "She is an employee," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a warning growl. "Sit down, Cassian. She has been here 2 weeks," Cassian argued, gesturing at Lena. "And suddenly she finds something that our auditors missed for 6 months. Doesn't that seem convenient to you? Maybe she is planting evidence. Maybe she is the one working for Rook." "I am not the one stealing from him," Lena shot back, her fear replaced by indignation. "I am the one trying to stop you from bleeding out." Cassian stepped toward her, looming over her small frame. "You walked away 3 years ago." He spat. "You left him in pieces. You do not get to come back and play loyal soldier now. That is enough," Adrian roared. He slammed his hand on the desk. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Adrian walked around the desk and stood between Lena and Cassian. He did not look at Lena. He stared his lieutenant down. "She stays," Adrian said, his voice ice cold, "and you will respect her. If she says there is a leak, we investigate the leak. We do not attack the messenger." Cassian held Adrian's gaze for a long moment, the tension in the room thick enough to choke on. Finally, Cassian nodded, though his eyes remained hard. "You are letting your feelings cloud your judgment, boss," Cassian said quietly. "It will get us all killed." Cassian grabbed the file from the desk and stormed out of the room, brushing past Lena with deliberate force. When the door slammed shut, the silence that followed was ringing. Lena let out a breath she had been holding. She felt small and exposed. "He hates me." She said, "He's protective," Adrian said, rubbing his temples. "He thinks I am vulnerable where you are concerned." Is he right? Lena asked. Adrian looked at her. He did not answer. The silence was an answer in itself. The storm hit Harborview 3 days later. It was a torrential downpour that battered the glass walls of the penthouse, turning the world outside into a gray, violent smear. It was late, past 10 in the evening. The office staff had gone home hours ago, but Lena was still in the library, the large oak table covered in documents. Adrian was there too, sitting across from her, reviewing the personnel files she had flagged. They were working to find the mole. The leak Lena had discovered was just the thread. They were trying to unravel the whole sweater. The wind howled outside, rattling the heavy window panes. The overhead chandelier flickered once, twice, and then died. The penthouse plunged into darkness. Lena gasped, freezing in her chair. "Stay still." Adrian's voice came from the dark, calm and reassuring. "It is just the storm grid. The backup generators will kick in for the essential systems, but the main lights might be out for a while." A moment later, a soft amber glow illuminated the room. Adrian had switched on the battery-operated desk lamps. The light was warm and intimate, casting long shadows against the walls filled with books. "We should stop for the night," Adrian said, watching her. "You look pale." "Lena, I want to finish this," she said, rubbing her eyes. "If we can prove who authorized the transfer on the 14th, we have him." Adrian stood up and walked around the table. He pulled a chair next to hers, the heavy wood scraping against the rug. "Show me," he said. He sat close, too close. Lena could smell the soap on his skin, the scent of crisp cotton and the faint, underlying musk that was just him. As he leaned forward to look at the document she was holding, his shoulder brushed against hers. The contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with fear. It was a warm, heavy pull low in her stomach. She froze, her breath hitching in her throat. Adrian did not pull away. He stayed there, his arm pressed against hers, his heat seeping into her cold skin. They sat in the pool of amber light, the storm raging outside, isolated from the rest of the world. "Here," Adrian said, his voice rough. He pointed to a signature on the page. His hand covered hers on the paper. His fingers were large and warm. Lena stared at his hand covering hers. It looked right. It looked like it belonged there. Suddenly, a massive crack of thunder shook the entire building. It was deafening, a sonic boom that vibrated through the floorboards. Lena reacted on instinct. The trauma of the gunshots, the alleyway, the violence, it all surged up. She gasped and grabbed Adrian's forearm, her fingers digging into his muscle. "I have you," Adrian said instantly. He shifted, turning his body toward her. He took her hand that was gripping his arm and sandwiched it between his own. His grip was firm, grounding her. "I have you, Lena," he repeated, his voice low and fierce. "You are safe." Lena looked up at him. His face was inches from hers, illuminated by the soft lamplight. His eyes were searching hers, filled with a raw intensity that stripped away all her defenses. "I hate the noise," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It sounds like—" "I know," he said. "I know what it sounds like." He ran his thumb over her knuckles, a soothing, rhythmic motion. "I will not let anyone hurt you again," he vowed. The words were a solemn oath. "Not the cartel, not Cassian, not anyone, including you?" she asked, the question hanging in the air like smoke. Adrian's expression fractured. He looked at her mouth, then back to her eyes. "Including me," he rasped. "I would cut off my own hand before I let it harm you. Lena, you have to believe that." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten, a painful, exquisite squeezing of her heart. She looked at this man, this dangerous, powerful man who had once broken her, and she saw the regret that lived in him. She saw the boy who had wanted to be an architect, trapped inside the armor of a kingpin. "I tried to hate you," Lena confessed, the words tumbling out before she could check them. "For 3 years, I tried so hard to hate you. I told myself you were a monster, and," Adrian asked, his voice barely audible. "And I failed," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "Part of me never stopped thinking about you. Part of me looked for your car every time I walked down the street." Adrian let out a ragged breath. He released her hand and reached up, his fingers trembling slightly as they grazed her jawline. His thumb traced the curve of her cheek, tilting her face upward. He searched her eyes, looking for permission, looking for a sign that he wasn't overstepping the boundaries she had set. Lena did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. "Adrian," she breathed. He closed the distance. The kiss was not like the ones in the movies. It was not smooth or practiced. It was desperate. It was the collision of two people who had been starving for each other. His lips were warm and firm against hers. He tasted of whiskey and longing. Lena let out a soft sound, a whimper of surrender, and opened her mouth to him. The kiss deepened instantly. Adrian groaned low in his throat, his control snapping. His hand slid from her jaw to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her steady as he devoured her. His other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her out of the chair and into the space between his spread knees. Lena's hands found purchase on his shirt, her fingers curling into the fabric, pulling him closer. She felt the hard wall of his chest, the rapid hammering of his heart that matched her own. It was a kiss filled with 3 years of anger, 3 years of missing him, 3 years of fear. It was an apology and a claim all at once. For a moment, the storm outside ceased to exist. There was only the heat of his mouth, the roughness of his stubble against her chin, the overwhelming solidity of him. But as Adrian's hand moved to her lower back, pressing her flush against him, reality crashed back in for Lena. The danger, the secrets, the life he led that had almost killed her once. She gasped and broke the kiss, pulling back, breathless and flushed. Her lips were swollen, her eyes wide. Adrian did not let her go completely. He kept his hands on her waist, his forehead resting against hers. They were both panting, breathing each other's air. "Lena," he whispered, his voice wrecked. "No," she gasped, placing her hands on his chest to create a sliver of distance. "No, Adrian." She looked at him, seeing the raw hope in his eyes, and it terrified her. "Do not do this," she said, her voice trembling. "Do not look at me like that." "Like what?" he asked. "Like I am the answer." She said, "I am not the answer, Adrian. I am just a woman who is tired of being afraid. I can protect you." He swore. "Can you?" she asked. "Can you promise me that if I stay, if I let this happen, that I won't end up bleeding on a warehouse floor again? Can you promise me that you won't choose the family over me when the time comes?" Adrian opened his mouth to answer, but he stopped. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the weight of his world settled back onto his shoulders. He closed his mouth. He could not promise that, and he respected her too much to lie. "Please," Lena whispered, pulling herself out of his arms. "Please do not make promises you cannot keep." She stepped back, the loss of his warmth hitting her like a physical blow. She grabbed her stack of files, hugging them to her chest like a shield. "I am going to my room," she said. Adrian remained seated in the amber light, his hands empty, watching her walk away into the shadows of the penthouse. "Good night, Lena," he said to the empty room. Outside, the thunder rolled again, a distant warning of the storms yet to come. The air in the penthouse had changed. Before the storm and the blackout, the atmosphere had been one of cold, professional distance, a wall of ice separating the boss from the employee. But after the kiss in the library, the ice had not just cracked, it had shattered, leaving a jagged, dangerous landscape that neither Lena nor Adrian knew how to navigate. For 3 days, they tried to pretend it had not happened. They returned to their routine in the East Wing office, sitting across the heavy oak table from one another, surrounded by stacks of ledgers and glowing monitors. But the silence was no longer empty. It was heavy with things unsaid. Every time Adrian handed her a file, his fingers would brush against hers, and the contact would send a shockwave through Lena's arm that made her breath hitch. She would catch him watching her when he thought she was focused on the screen, his dark eyes tracing the line of her neck with a hunger he barely concealed. And she was no better. She found herself watching his hands as he signed documents, remembering the weight of them on her waist, the heat of his palm against her jaw. It was a torture of their own making. Lena was torn apart by the duality of her existence during the daylight hours, sitting in the safety of his fortress. She felt a profound sense of protection she had not known in years, but at night, alone in the guest suite, the old fear would creep back in. She would remember the warehouse. She would remember the blood. She told herself that falling for him again was like falling in love with a loaded gun. Eventually, it would go off. On Thursday morning, the investigation into the financial leak took a dark turn. Lena had been cross-referencing the shell companies they had identified with the internal communication logs of Adrian's lieutenants. She found a pattern, a series of encrypted transfers authorized by a terminal that belonged to someone in the inner circle. "Adrian," she said, her voice tight, "come look at this." Adrian walked around the desk to stand behind her chair. He placed one hand on the backrest, leaning over her shoulder. His cologne, cedar and rain, filled her senses, making it hard to concentrate. "Look at the timestamps," she pointed out, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Every time a shipment is scheduled to leave the docks, a small transfer is made to this account in the Caymans. It is a signal." Adrian leaned closer, his chest brushing her shoulder. He stared at the screen, his expression hardening into granite. "It is a payout," he murmured, his voice vibrating against her ear. "They are not just stealing money. They are being paid for the shipping routes. Someone is selling us out to the Rook cartel." Before Lena could respond, Adrian's personal cell phone buzzed on the desk. It was a burner phone he used only for high-level threats. He picked it up, he read the message, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the device. "What is it?" Lena asked, turning in her chair to look at him. "Nothing," Adrian said too quickly. He shoved the phone into his pocket and stepped away from her, creating a sudden, cold distance. "Adrian," she pressed, standing up, "do not lie to me. If we are doing this, we are doing it together." "What did it say?" Adrian looked at her, his jaw working. He pulled the phone back out and held it up. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was short and brutal. "The girl will pay for your softness." Lena stared at the screen, a cold knot forming in her stomach. They knew she was here. They knew she mattered to him. Before she could process the threat, her own phone rang. It was sitting on a stack of files. The screen flashed a name she had not seen in 3 years. Jamie. Lena froze. Jamie was a mechanic on the south side, a kind man with grease under his fingernails who had helped her smuggle herself out of the city when she first ran from Adrian. He was the only link to her past life she had kept. She picked up the phone, her hands shaking. "Jamie," she answered. "Lena." Jamie's voice came through, breathless and panicked. "You need to listen to me. Some guys came by the shop today. Suits. They were not cops." Lena's heart slammed against her ribs. "Who were they, Jamie?" "They were asking about you," he whispered. "They were asking about the girl Morello used years ago. They showed me a picture." "Lena." "It was an old one, from before. They said they knew I helped you leave town. I told them I haven't seen you, but... Lena, they broke my fingers." Lena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh God, Jamie, I am okay," he said quickly, though his voice was strained with pain. "But you need to run. They are turning over every stone. They said the Rook boss wants to finish what started in that warehouse." The line clicked dead. Lena dropped the phone onto the desk. The guilt crashed over her like a physical wave. It was happening again. Her's presence was a poison that infected everyone around her. First Adrian, now Jamie. She looked up at Adrian. He was watching her with a terrifying intensity. "They hurt Jamie," she whispered. "Because of me." "We will find him," Adrian said, stepping toward her. "I will send a team to the south side right now." "No," Lena said, backing away. "Do you not see? It does not matter what you do. As long as I am here, people get hurt. I am the leverage." "Adrian." "I am the weakness. I am locking down the building," Adrian said, ignoring her spiral. His voice shifted into the cold, commanding tone of the dawn. "You are not to leave this penthouse. Not for work, not for anything. I am pulling you off the books." "What?" Lena snapped, her fear turning into defensive anger. You cannot just lock me away. I can and I will, Adrian replied, his voice rising. The threat is specific. Lena, they want you. I am not letting you out of my sight until I burn the Rook cartel to the ground. I am not a prisoner. Adrian, she shouted. You are if it keeps you alive, he shouted back. The anger in the room was palpable, a live wire sparking between them. I am trying to help you, Lena cried. I am finding the leak. I am useful. You are a target, Adrian roared. He paced the room, running a hand through his hair. Do you think I care about the money? Do you think I care about the shipping routes? I can lose all of it, but I cannot lose you again. Lena stopped. The raw honesty in his voice silenced her. You are trying to control me, she said, her voice shaking but quieter now. Just like 3 years ago. You move me around like a piece on your board. You decide where I go, where I stay. I am trying to save you, he said, his voice cracking. You are suffocating me, she countered. I am not a damsel. Adrian, I am the woman who survived you. She turned to leave, but Adrian caught her arm. He spun her around, not roughly, but with a desperation that bordered on madness. I am not trying to control you, he said, his eyes searching hers, wild and pleading. I am terrified. Lena, do you understand that? I am terrified. The admission hung in the air. Adrian Morello, the man who stared down hitmen and negotiated wars, was trembling. Lena looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. She saw the lines of exhaustion, the fear that mirrored her own, and beneath the fear, she saw the love that he had never been allowed to speak. The fight went out of her. Her shoulders slumped. I am scared too, she whispered, tears spilling over her lashes. I am scared because I hate this life. I hate the guns and the threats, but mostly I am scared of how much I still want you. Adrian went still. What did you say? He asked softly. I want you, she confessed, the truth tearing its way out of her throat, and it terrifies me. Because loving you feels like walking into a fire. Adrian let out a sound that was half groan, half sob. He stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. He raised his hands and cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away the tears that streaked her cheeks. His hands were shaking. I am sorry, he breathed, his forehead resting against hers. I am sorry for every time I chose the family over you. I am sorry for the warehouse. I am sorry for the coat. I am sorry that I am a monster. But I am a monster who belongs to you. Lena looked at him, seeing the vulnerability he hid from the world. She realized in that moment that she could not run anymore, not from the cartel, and not from this. She did not pull away. Instead, she reached up and threaded her fingers into the hair at the nape of his neck. Then be my monster, she whispered. Adrian kissed her. This was not the tentative, searching kiss of the library. This was a collision of souls. He kissed her as if she were the oxygen he had been denied for 3 years. It was urgent, messy, and deeply, achingly real. Lena made a small sound against his mouth, her body softening, molding against the hard planes of his chest. She felt the tension of the last few weeks, the last few years, dissolve into the heat of his touch. Adrian's hands moved from her face to her shoulders. He gripped the fabric of her blouse, as if testing the reality of her presence. Then, slowly, reverently, he pushed the heavy wool of his own coat, which she had been wearing like armor, off her shoulders. It fell to the floor with a soft thud, a discarded barrier. He pulled her closer, his hands trailing down the curve of her spine, pressing her hips against his. Lena gasped, feeling the undeniable evidence of his desire, but also the trembling restraint in his muscles. He was holding himself back, terrified of breaking her. Adrian, she murmured, pulling back just enough to look him in the eye. I am not glass. You do not have to be gentle. Just be here. I am here, he vowed. He swept her up into his arms. Lena wrapped her legs around his waist, burying her face in the crook of his neck, inhaling the scent of him. He carried her out of the office, down the hallway, and into the master bedroom. He did not turn on the lights. The city glow from the windows cast the room in shades of blue and silver. He lowered her onto the bed, following her down, his body covering hers like a shield. The night that followed was not just about passion, it was a reckoning. It was the frantic unbuttoning of shirts and the desperate slide of skin against skin. It was Adrian tracing the scar on her arm with his lips, whispering apologies into her skin until she silenced him with a kiss. It was Lena holding him as he shook, anchoring him to the bed, to the moment, to her. There were no more walls. There were only murmured reassurances, the tangle of limbs, and the heavy, emotional weight of two damaged people trying to build something whole out of their broken pieces. When the sun finally rose over Harborview, it filtered through the sheer curtains in ribbons of pale gold. Lena woke first. She lay still for a long time, listening to the rhythm of Adrian's breathing. He was asleep beside her, one arm draped heavily over her waist, pinning her to the mattress even in his dreams. The sheet was tangled around their legs. She turned her head to look at him. In the soft morning light, the lines of stress on his face had smoothed out. His dark lashes rested against his cheeks. He looked younger. He looked unguarded. He looked almost boyish, stripping away the title of Don and leaving just the man. Lena felt a surge of tenderness so strong it made her chest ache. She reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead, but beneath the tenderness, dread began to coil in her stomach like a cold snake. She was happy. In this bed, in this moment, she was happy, and in her life. Happiness was usually the calm before the slaughter. She carefully extricated herself from his arm, sliding out of bed. She needed water. She needed to clear her head before the reality of the cartel and the leak came crashing back in. She walked to the small table by the balcony doors where she had left her phone the night before. The screen lit up as she picked it up. There was a new message notification. It was from an unknown number. Lena swiped the screen to unlock it. The image that loaded made her blood freeze in her veins. It was a photograph, a grainy, high-contrast shot taken through glass. It showed a bed. It showed a man with dark hair asleep, his arm thrown over a woman. It showed Lena's face, eyes closed, head resting on a pillow. It was them. It was a photo of them sleeping, taken from the balcony, taken only an hour ago. Lena spun around, staring at the glass doors leading to the terrace. They were locked. The curtains were drawn, but there was a gap. A small 3-inch gap where the fabric didn't meet. Someone had been on the balcony. Someone had stood outside the glass while they slept, watching them. Her phone buzzed again with a text message following the photo. "We know where you sleep. Tell us what he is planning, or next time we do not just take pictures." Lena clamped her hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. The phone shook violently in her grip. They were inside. The security, the fortress, the penthouse, it was all an illusion. The Rook cartel could touch them whenever they wanted. She looked back at the bed. Adrian was still sleeping, peaceful and unaware. If she woke him, he would go to war. He would tear the city apart. He would put himself in the line of fire, and he would lose, because they had the ultimate leverage now. They had proof that he loved her. Panic, cold and irrational, seized her. She could not let him see this. Not yet. She needed time to think. She needed to figure out how to save Jamie, how to save herself, without getting Adrian killed. With trembling fingers, she deleted the message. She deleted the photo. She wiped the thread. She took a deep breath, forcing her heart rate to slow down. She walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. She looked at her reflection. The woman staring back looked terrified, but beneath the fear, there was a steel resolve. She would not let them hurt him. When she walked back into the bedroom, Adrian was stirring. He sat up, the sheet falling to his waist. He blinked sleepily, then smiled when he saw her. It was a genuine, lazy smile that transformed his face. "Good morning," he rasped, his voice thick with sleep. "Good morning," Lena said. She forced a smile onto her face. It felt brittle, like a mask that might crack at any moment. Adrian stretched, his muscles flexing. He looked at the sunlight streaming in. "I feel good," he said, sounding surprised. "Better than I have in years." He looked at her, his expression turning serious. "I am going to end this. Lena, today. I am going to meet with the security team. We are going to lock down the leak, and then I am going to push the Rook family out of the city for good. No more hiding, no more fear." He stood up and walked toward her. He wrapped his arms around her, kissing her forehead. "You are safe now," he whispered into her hair. "I promise." Lena closed her eyes. Leaning against his chest, she listened to the strong, steady beat of his heart. She felt the warmth of his skin. And she knew he was wrong. I know, she lied, her voice soft and hollow. She opened her eyes and looked over his shoulder at the balcony doors. The gap in the curtain stared back at her like a dark, unblinking eye. She was not safe, and neither was he. She was no longer just his lover. She was the weapon the enemy was holding against his throat. The vibration of the phone against the marble countertop sounded like a drill boring into bone. Lena stared at the device, her stomach churning with a nausea that had nothing to do with the morning sickness of anxiety and everything to do with the message flashing on the screen. "Open it," the text read, or "We send a finger first." Lena's hand shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. She tapped the link. The screen filled with a live video feed. The quality was grainy, the lighting harsh and fluorescent, but the image was unmistakable. Jamie was tied to a metal chair in the center of a damp, concrete room. His face was a map of violence. One eye was swollen shut, purple and angry, and a trail of dried blood ran from his split lip to his chin. He was slumped forward, chest heaving with ragged breaths. Lena clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. Jamie, who had fixed her radiator for free. Jamie, who'd driven her to the bus station 3 years ago and told her not to look back. He was a mechanic, a civilian. He had nothing to do with this war except for knowing her. A voice spoke from off-camera in the video, distorted and metallic. "We know he is moving the shipment tonight," the voice said. "We know you are in the penthouse. We want the route. Lena, we want the drop location. You have 1 hour to meet us. If you tell Morello, the mechanic dies. If you do not show up, the mechanic dies." The feed cut to black. Lena gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. The panic was a cold, rising tide. If she told Adrian, he would lock the city down. He would launch a rescue mission. But rescue missions took time, and the cartel had made it clear they had none. They would kill Jamie the moment they sensed a threat. She had to buy time. She had to stall them. She looked toward the bedroom door. Adrian was in the shower. She could hear the water running. He thought they were safe. He thought the biggest threat was a photo taken from a balcony. She grabbed a notepad and a pen. Her handwriting was jagged. "I need air. Do not look for me. I will be back." It was a pathetic lie, vague and alarming, but it was the best she could do. She tore the page off and left it on the kitchen island. She grabbed her purse, shoved the phone inside, and slipped out the service entrance of the penthouse before her courage could fail her. The meeting point was Centennial Park. It was midday, and the park was a sprawling canvas of normalcy. Families pushed strollers along the paved paths, joggers wove through the crowds, and tourists took photos of the skyline. The juxtaposition made Lena feel sick. She was walking through a postcard while carrying a death sentence in her pocket. She found the bench near the duck pond as instructed. She sat down, clutching her purse to her chest, her eyes darting behind sunglasses. 5 minutes later, a man sat down next to her. He did not look like a thug. He wore a beige polo shirt and slacks, looking like any other office worker on a lunch break. But when he turned to her, his smile did not reach his eyes. They were flat, dead shark eyes. "Lena Ward," the man said pleasantly. "I am Rafe." "Where is he?" Lena demanded, her voice a hushed hiss. "Let him go. He knows nothing. He knows you," Rafe said, tearing off a piece of a bagel and tossing it to the ducks, "and that makes him valuable. Let us skip the negotiation." "The shipment tonight. Where is it landing?" "I do not know." Lena lied. "Adrian does not tell me those things." Rafe turned his head slightly. He pulled a phone from his pocket and tapped the screen. He held it up for her to see. It was Jamie again. A man in a black mask was holding a heavy wrench over Jamie's hand. "Do not lie to me, Lena." Rafe said softly. "We know you have been looking at the books. We know you found the leak, which means you know the schedule." Lena felt tears prick her eyes behind the sunglasses. She was trapped. If she gave them the location, she was betraying Adrian. She was sending his men into an ambush, but if she didn't, Jamie would be maimed, perhaps killed, right in front of her eyes on a 4-inch screen. The wrench on the screen moved an inch closer. "Stop," Lena gasped. "Stop!" Rafe paused his thumb over the screen. "Talk. It is the naval yards," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Pier 42, midnight." Rafe smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "And the vantage points, where will Morello's snipers be?" "I do not know that," she pleaded. "Guess," Rafe said. "Or Jamie loses a thumb." Lena broke. She described the layout she had seen on the blueprints in Adrian's office. She pointed out the crane towers and the warehouse roofs. She gave him everything he needed to slaughter Adrian's men. Rafe pocketed the phone. "Good girl." "When do you release him?" she asked, grabbing his wrist. "When the shipment is ours and Morello is dead," Rafe said. He stood up, brushing crumbs from his pants. "Go back to the penthouse. Act normal. If you warn him, we will know, and Jamie will scream for a very long time before he dies." He walked away, blending seamlessly into the crowd of happy families. Lena remained on the bench, shivering in the warm sunlight, feeling more hollowed out than she had ever been in her life. Back at the penthouse, Adrian stood in the center of the kitchen, holding the note. His hair was still damp from the shower, but his body was rigid with tension. Marco stood by the door, looking uncomfortable. "She took the service elevator," Marco reported. "We tracked her phone to Centennial Park. She sat on a bench for 10 minutes. Then she turned around and came back." "Did she meet anyone?" Adrian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "We cannot confirm," Marco said. "The cameras in the park are spotty." Adrian crumpled the note in his fist. "I need air." It was the excuse of a liar. The elevator chimed, the doors slid open, and Lena stepped out. She looked pale. Her sunglasses were perched on top of her head, and her eyes were red-rimmed. She stopped when she saw Adrian and Marco waiting for her. "Where did you go?" Adrian asked. He did not shout, which was worse. "I told you," she said, walking past him toward the living room, keeping her face averted. "I needed air. I felt suffocated." "You went to the park," Adrian said. Lena froze. She turned slowly. "You tracked me." "I am protecting you," Adrian snapped, stepping into her space. "You are a target, Lena. You do not go for a stroll when there is a price on your head. Who did you see?" "No one," she lied, her heart hammered against her ribs. "I just sat by the water. I needed to think." Adrian stared at her. He studied the tremor in her hands, the way she refused to meet his gaze directly. He knew every inch of her face. He knew when she was scared, and he knew when she was hiding something. "She is lying," a voice in his head whispered. "She is working an angle." But looking at her, seeing the sheer exhaustion and terror radiating off her, his anger warred with his instinct to comfort her. He remembered the night before, the way she had held him. "Fine," Adrian said, clipping the word, "but you do not leave this apartment again. Tonight is the handoff. Once the shipment is secure, we are going on the offensive." Lena nodded, looking sick. "Okay." Adrian watched her go into the bedroom. He turned to Marco. "Change the route," he ordered in a low voice. "Boss," Marco asked, confused. "Change the route for the convoy," Adrian said, his eyes fixed on the bedroom door. "And switch the drop point from Pier 42 to the container yard on the south side. You think she—" Marco trailed off. "I think she is scared," Adrian said grimly. "And scared people make bad decisions. I am not taking the chance." The night air at the docks was thick with the smell of salt and diesel. The container yard was a maze of rusted metal giants, stacked 5 high, creating deep canyons of shadow. Lena sat in the back of Adrian's armored SUV. He had insisted she come. He wouldn't leave her at the penthouse unguarded, and he needed to keep his eyes on her. The convoy of 3 trucks idled in the center of the yard. Adrian stood outside the car, speaking into a radio. "Hold position," he commanded. Lena peered out the window. This wasn't Pier 42. This was the South Yard. He had changed the location. Relief washed over her, followed instantly by terror. If the cartel went to the wrong pier, they would know she had failed. They would kill Jamie. But then, the night exploded. Floodlights from the tops of the container stacks flared to life, blindingly bright. Gunfire erupted from the shadows, not from the pier, but from the ridges of the container yard itself. It's an ambush. Marco screamed over the radio. The cartel hadn't just covered the pier. They had covered the secondary sites, too. Rafe had anticipated Adrian's paranoia. "Get down," Adrian roared, diving behind the SUV as bullets sparked against the armored plating. The container yard descended into chaos. Adrian's men returned fire, the staccato rhythm of automatic weapons echoing off the metal walls. A grenade detonated near the lead truck, flipping it onto its side in a shower of sparks and flame. Lena curled into a ball on the floor of the car, covering her ears. The noise was deafening. Suddenly, the back door of the SUV was ripped open. Lena looked up, expecting Adrian. Instead, a hand grabbed her by the hair. "Come here," a voice snarled. It was Rafe. He had used the chaos to circle around. Lena screamed as he dragged her out of the car. She stumbled onto the gravel, scraping her knees. Rafe hauled her up, twisting her arm behind her back. He dragged her away from the firefight, pulling her into the narrow alleyway between two towering stacks of shipping containers. "You tried to play us," Rafe spat, shoving her forward. "You gave us the pier, but you knew he would switch." "I didn't know," Lena cried. Stumbling, "I swear, liar," Rafe hissed. He slammed her against the corrugated metal wall of a container. The impact knocked the wind out of her. "You never really escaped, did you?" "Lena," he taunted, leaning in close. "You are still just a piece of trash he dragged out of the gutter, and now your mechanic friend is going to bleed out because of you." The mention of Jamie ignited a spark of fury in Lena that burned through the fear. She let out a primal scream and drove her knee upward into Rafe's groin. Rafe grunted, doubling over slightly. Lena didn't stop. She raked her fingernails down his face, aiming for his eyes. "You bitch!" Rafe roared. He recovered faster than she expected. He backhanded her across the face. The force of the blow sent her spinning. She hit the ground hard, tasting blood. Before she could scramble away, Rafe was on top of her. He pinned her to the dirt, his knee pressing into her chest. He drew a serrated combat knife from his belt. "Say goodbye. Lena, let her go." The voice was a thunderclap. Rafe froze. He looked up. Adrian stood at the end of the alleyway. He was a terrifying sight. His dress shirt was torn, stained with blood from a graze wound on his shoulder. His gun was leveled directly at Rafe's head. His eyes were black voids of pure, unadulterated rage. "Drop the knife," Adrian ordered, "or I will take your head off." Rafe laughed breathlessly. He pressed the blade against Lena's throat. A thin bead of blood welled up under the steel. "You shoot me. I open her up," Rafe said, "and even if you save her, the mechanic dies." "We have a live feed. Morello. My men are watching. If I do not check in within 2 minutes, they cut his throat." Adrian's finger tightened on the trigger. He looked at Lena. He saw the terror in her eyes, the blood on her lip, the knife at her throat. "Let her up," Adrian said, his voice shaking with the effort of not firing, "and you walk away." Rafe weighed his options. The ambush had turned into a messy brawl. He had lost the advantage of surprise. He slowly stood up, dragging Lena with him, keeping the knife pressed to her jugular. "Smart choice," Rafe said. He shoved Lena forward. She stumbled toward Adrian, falling to her knees. Rafe backed away into the shadows. "Tick-tock. Morello," Rafe called out. "The game is not over." Then he turned and vanished into the smoke and darkness of the yard. Adrian did not chase him. He dropped to his knees in the dirt, holstering his gun. He grabbed Lena by the shoulders, his grip bruising. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, scanning her frantically. "I am fine," she sobbed. "I am fine." He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her hair. For a moment he just held her, breathing hard. Then he stiffened. He pushed her back, holding her at arm's length. His expression shifted from relief to a cold, dawning realization. "He knew where we were," Adrian said. His voice was dangerously calm. He knew the secondary site. Only 3 people knew I might switch to the south yard. Me, Marco, and the person who saw the contingency plans in my office. Lena looked at him, tears streaming down her face mixed with dirt. Adrian, she whispered, "You told them." Adrian said, "It was not a question. You went to the park, you met him, and you told them how to kill us." Back at the penthouse, the silence was louder than the gunfire had been. Adrian paced the living room, stripping off his bloodied shirt and throwing it onto the floor. Lena stood by the window, hugging herself, shivering uncontrollably. "3 of my men are dead," Adrian said. He did not yell. He spoke with a flat, devastating exhaustion. 3 men with families, because you decided to play God, because you kept secrets. I had no choice, Lena cried, turning to face him. "They have Jamie." Adrian stopped pacing. "Who?" "Jamie," she sobbed, breaking down completely. "My friend, the mechanic who helped me leave 3 years ago. They kidnapped him. Adrian, they sent me a video. They are torturing him. They said if I did not give them the location, they would kill him." She sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. "I tried to stall them." She wept. "I tried to lie, but they were going to kill him right in front of me. I could not let him die because of me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Adrian stared at her. The anger that had been fueling him began to drain away, replaced by a hollow ache in his chest. He looked at the woman he loved, curled into a ball of guilt and misery. He realized then what she had done. She had betrayed him. Yes, she had risked his empire and his life, but she had done it to save an innocent man. She had done it because she refused to let someone else become collateral damage in their war. She had done for Jamie what Adrian had failed to do for her 3 years ago. When the choice had been between the mission and the person, Adrian had chosen the mission. Lena had chosen the person. He walked over to the sofa. He sat down next to her. He did not touch her. Not yet. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked softly. "Because you would have chosen the war," she whispered through her fingers. "You would have sacrificed him to get the cartel, just like you sacrificed me." The words hit him like a physical blow. He deserved them. Adrian reached out and gently pulled her hands away from her face. He forced her to look at him. His eyes were sad, filled with a lifetime of regrets. "You are right," he admitted hoarsely. "The old me. The man you hate. He would have sacrificed him." He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "But I am not that man anymore. Lena, I cannot be, not if I want to be worthy of you." He stood up, pulling her with him. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight against his bare chest. "We are going to get him back," Adrian vowed into her hair. "We are going to save Jamie, and then I am going to end this. For good." Lena clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder. For the first time, she believed him, not because he was a powerful Don, but because he was finally willing to be something more. The blueprint for the assault lay spread across the mahogany dining table, anchored by a heavy crystal tumbler of whiskey and a loaded handgun. The penthouse was silent. Stripped of the illusion of domestic peace that had briefly existed there, it was now a war room. Adrian stood over the map, his eyes tracing the entry points of the derelict shipyard where the Rook cartel had taken Jamie. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week, because he hadn't. The guilt of Lena's betrayal had calcified into a cold, hard resolve. He was not just planning a rescue, he was planning an execution of the entire Rook organization. "We go in hard," Adrian said, his voice a low rumble. "We hit the perimeter at 0300. My team takes out the sentries. We breach the east wall. It will be a bloodbath, Lena. But it is the only way to get Jamie out and end this." Lena stood on the other side of the table. She looked at the red markers on the map, representing men who would likely die. She looked at Adrian, seeing the darkness gathering around him again. If he went in like this, with fire and fury, he would burn down the city, and he might never come back from the ashes. "No," Lena said. Adrian looked up, his brow furrowing. "No," she repeated, her voice steady. "If you go in, guns blazing, they will kill Jamie before you even breach the door. Rafe told me that. They are waiting for you to be a hammer. Adrian, so do not be a hammer. What do you suggest? Adrian asked, frustration tightening his jaw. That I ask them nicely. We use their own weapon against them, Lena said. She walked around the table, encroaching on his space, forcing him to look at her not as a protectee, but as a partner. They rely on leverage. They rely on fear and secrecy. They thrive because they operate in the dark. So we turn on the lights. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, silver device. It was a high-frequency transmitter she had found in his desk drawer earlier, a remnant of his espionage equipment. I go in, Lena said. Absolutely not, Adrian snapped, straightening up. Listen to me, she demanded. Placing a hand on his chest, Rafe expects me to come back. He thinks I am broken. He thinks I am terrified. I walk in there, and I get them talking. I get Kellen Rook to admit what he has done. The drive-by shootings, the financial theft, the kidnapping, and we broadcast it, not just to the police, but to the news outlets, to the federal agencies, to the public. It is suicide, Adrian said, grabbing her shoulders. I am not letting you walk back into that warehouse. You do not have a choice, Lena said, her eyes blazing. Because this is the only way we save Jamie and keep you out of prison. If you start a war tonight, the feds will come for you too. But if we hand them the Rook cartel on a silver platter, you walk away. We walk away. Adrian stared at her. He saw the terrified girl from the diner, but she was gone. In her place was a woman forged in the fire of his own world, sharp and dangerous and brave. He hated the plan. It terrified him more than any gunfight, but as he looked at the tactical map, he knew she was right. 1 hour later, the preparations were complete. Adrian's contact in the cybercrime unit had set up a secure, untraceable relay. Lena wore a wire taped beneath her blouse, the microphone resting just above her heart. They stood by the elevator. The air was thick with things unsaid. Adrian adjusted the collar of her coat, his fingers lingering on her skin. If anything goes wrong, he whispered, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. If the signal cuts out, if they touch you, I am coming in, and I will leave nothing standing. I know, Lena said. She reached up and kissed him. It was a soft, fleeting touch, a promise of return. Trust me, Adrian. She stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, cutting off her view of him, Lena let out a shaky breath. She was terrified. But she was done running. The warehouse smelled of brine, rust, and old blood. It was a cavernous, hollow space where shadows seemed to stretch and twist like living things. Lena walked into the center of the floor, her hands raised. I am here, she called out. Her voice echoed off the metal beams. Movement stirred in the gloom. Rafe stepped out from behind a stack of crates, a smug grin plastered on his face. Behind him sat Jamie. He was conscious, but barely. His head hung low, and fresh bruises mottled his skin. But he was alive. Well done, Rafe said slowly. You know, I bet your boyfriend is outside right now, lining up a shot, but it won't matter. A second figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man Lena had only seen in pictures. Kellen Rook. He was older than Adrian, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than the building they were standing in. He held himself with the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. Miss Ward, Kellen said, his voice smooth and oily. I must admit, I am impressed. You have caused me a great deal of trouble for a waitress. Let him go, Lena said, pointing at Jamie. I am here. That was the deal. The deal has changed. Kellen laughed. He walked toward her, circling her like a shark. You see, Adrian Morello is a stubborn man. He needs to be broken completely before he will yield the city to me, and nothing breaks a man quite like watching the woman he loves die. Lena's heart hammered against the wire taped to her chest. She forced herself to hold her ground. You are going to kill me, she asked, pitching her voice to be clear. Just like you killed those 3 men at the docks. Just like you ordered the drive-by at the diner. Kellen smirked. He enjoyed an audience, even a dying one. It was necessary business, he said, waving a hand dismissively. Morello was getting sloppy. The city needs a firm hand. The docks, the financial siphon. It was all precision work. We took millions from right under his nose, and the police were too busy chasing their own tails to notice. And the threats, Lena pressed. The kidnapping, collateral damage, Kellen sneered. In this world, the weak are currency. You and your mechanic friend are just bargaining chips. Once I put a bullet in you, Adrian will lose his mind. He will attack blindly, and the police will take him down for me. It is the perfect checkmate. Lena looked at him, her fear transforming into a cold satisfaction. Checkmate, she repeated softly. Outside, in the mobile command van. Adrian listened to the confession. Beside him, the police scanner exploded with chatter. Dispatch. We have a credible anonymous tip. Multiple feeds broadcasting a confession from the Rook warehouse. Suspect admits to multiple homicides. All units. Proceed to Sector 4. Adrian ripped the headset off. Move, he roared into his radio. Inside the warehouse, the air shifted. Kellen frowned, tilting his head. Do you hear that? He asked Rafe. In the distance, the wail of sirens began to rise, a chorus of justice closing in from all sides. Rafe pulled out his phone. His face went pale. Boss, he stammered. The internet. It is everywhere. The feed, it is live. Kellen's eyes snapped to Lena. He realized, too late. The trap he had walked into? You little witch, he snarled. The warehouse doors burst open. Morello, drop your weapons! A voice amplified by a megaphone boomed from outside, but it wasn't the police. It was Adrian's vanguard. Smoke canisters smashed through the high windows, filling the room with thick, white fog. Gunfire erupted, controlled and precise, taking out the lights and plunging the warehouse into chaos. Adrian's men stormed the building. Rafe went for his gun, but a shot from the catwalk clipped his leg, sending him sprawling. Lena scrambled toward Jamie. She pulled a knife from her boot, a gift from Marco before she left, and slashed through the ropes binding his hands. Run! She screamed at him. Go out the back! Jamie stumbled up, disoriented but moving. Lena turned to follow him, but a hand clamped around her arm like a vice. Kellen Rook yanked her back. His face was twisted in a rictus of hate. He wrapped an arm around her throat and jammed the barrel of a pistol against her temple. Stop! Kellen screamed. The command echoed through the smoke. Adrian emerged from the haze, his weapon raised. He froze when he saw Lena. Kellen was using her as a human shield, his body tucked safely behind hers. Back off, Kellen shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. Back off or I paint the wall with her. The sirens were deafening now. Right outside the building, the police were seconds away from breaching the perimeter. Adrian stood 10 feet away. His gun was leveled, but his hand was trembling. He could not take the shot. The risk was too high. Let her go, Kellen, Adrian said, his voice deadly calm. It is over. The police are here. You are going to jail. Do not add her death to the list. I am not going to jail, Kellen spat. I am walking out of here, and she is coming with me. If anyone follows, she dies. He began to drag Lena backward toward the loading bay. Lena looked at Adrian. She saw the agony in his eyes. He was calculating the odds, weighing the shot, terrifyingly close to lowering his weapon to save her, even if it meant letting Kellen escape. She remembered the man he used to be, the man who treated people like chess pieces, the man who would have sacrificed a pawn to take the king. But looking at him now, she knew he wouldn't do it. He would let the villain go to keep her safe. He would lose everything for her. Please do not hurt me again, she whispered. Kellen thought she was begging him. He tightened his grip, sneering. Shut up. But Adrian heard her. He saw her eyes lock onto his. He understood. She wasn't begging. She was giving him permission. She was telling him to take the risk. She was trusting him to be the marksman, to be the protector, to be the man who could save her without destroying himself. Adrian took a breath. He steadied his hand. Now, he mouthed. Lena drove her elbow backward with all the strength she possessed, aiming for the floating ribs beneath Kellen's suit jacket. Kellen grunted, the sudden pain causing his grip to loosen for a fraction of a second. The gun barrel slipped from her temple. Crack. Adrian fired. The bullet whizzed past Lena's ear, close enough to singe her hair. It struck Kellen in the right shoulder, shattering the bone. The impact spun him around. He dropped the gun, screaming in pain, and collapsed to the concrete floor. Adrian was moving before the casing hit the ground. He sprinted forward, kicking Kellen's gun away, and grabbed Lena, pulling her into his chest. He shielded her as blue and red lights flooded the warehouse. Uniformed officers swarmed the entrance, guns drawn, down on the ground. The police shouted. Adrian looked at Lena. He kissed the top of her head fiercely. "Stay down," he whispered. "Say nothing." He released her and raised his hands, stepping away from her to draw the police's attention. It wasn't an arrest, it was a containment. With the broadcast evidence, the police were focused on the screaming cartel leader on the floor. In the confusion, amidst the smoke and the shouting, Adrian's lawyers and fixers were already moving, pulling strings to ensure that while the Rook Empire fell, the Morello organization simply faded into the shadows. 3 weeks later, the autumn wind whipped off the harbor, carrying the scent of salt and imminent winter. Lena stood on the cobblestones of the quiet street near the water. Her arm was in a sling, a sprain from the scuffle, but otherwise, she was whole. Adrian stood beside her. He wore a heavy wool coat, but he looked different. The weight of the crown seemed lighter, or perhaps he had just learned how to carry it differently. Since the raid, the city had been quiet. The Rook cartel was decimated, their leadership indicted on federal charges thanks to the recording. Adrian had used the opportunity not to expand, but to retract. He had sold the shipping routes that caused the most trouble. He had shuttered the fronts that drew too much heat. He was shrinking the empire to save the man. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a plane ticket. "Paris," he said, holding it out to her. "It is a one-way ticket. There is a bank account in your name with enough to start over. A bookstore, a cafe, whatever you want, Lena." Lena looked at the ticket. It was the escape she had dreamed of for 3 years. It was safety. It was peace. "You are sending me away?" she asked quietly. "I am setting you free," Adrian corrected. He looked out at the water, refusing to meet her eyes. "I am a selfish man. Lena, I want to keep you. But I promised I wouldn't hurt you again, and my world is always going to be dangerous. You deserve sunlight. You deserve a life where you do not have to wear a wire to survive dinner." Lena took the ticket. She looked at it for a long moment, then she tore it in half. Adrian flinched. He turned to look at her, shock registering on his face. "Lena," he warned. "Do not be foolish." "I am not being foolish," she said, letting the pieces of paper flutter to the ground. "I am making a choice." She stepped closer to him, fighting the wind. "You are right, Adrian, your world is dangerous, and I hate the violence. I hate the fear. But 3 weeks ago, you had a gun in your hand and a chance to kill your enemy, and you hesitated because you were afraid of hurting me. You dismantled half your empire to make sure no one would come after me again." She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold, but his grip was solid. "You are not the man who left me in that warehouse anymore," she said. "You are the man who walked into the fire for me, and I am not the girl who runs away. I cannot promise you it will be easy," Adrian said, his voice rough. "I cannot promise you it will always be safe. I do not want safe," Lena whispered. "I want real. I want to build something honest with you, Adrian, even if we have to build it from the ruins." Adrian looked at her. For a moment, he simply breathed, as if he were inhaling the first clean air of his life. The darkness that had clung to him for so years seemed to recede, pushed back by the light in her eyes. He stepped closer. The wind howled around them, cold and biting. Lena shivered involuntarily, without a word. Adrian shrugged off his heavy charcoal coat. He wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling the lapels tight under her chin, cocooning her in his warmth, his scent, and his protection. It was the same gesture as that night in the alley, but the meaning had changed entirely. It was no longer a cage, it was a shelter. "Please do not hurt me again," Lena whispered, looking up at him. Her voice was not afraid, it was vulnerable. It was the plea of a woman handing over her heart, knowing it could be broken, but hoping it would be held. Adrian rested his forehead against hers. He held her gently against his chest, his hands resting on the wool of the coat that bound them together. "I promise," he vowed softly into the space between them. The only thing I'm going to break is the cycle that kept us prisoners." He kissed her, soft and lingering, a seal on a new contract. They turned and began to walk down the street, away from the dark water and toward the city lights. Adrian's arm was around her, and Lena's hand was tucked deep inside the pocket of his coat, her fingers intertwined with his. The threat of the underworld would never completely vanish. There would always be shadows in Harborview. But as they walked into the deepening twilight, they walked as partners, matching each other step for step, ready to face whatever came next, together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey of heartbreak, danger, and redemption for Lena and Adrian, and I hope their ending touched your heart. I would love to hear from you. Please comment down below and tell me where you are listening from. Did you agree with Lena's choice to stay? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more emotional, realistic tales of love and loyalty, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and hit the notification bell so you never miss a chapter. Share your thoughts in English in the comments section. I read every single one. Until next time.